Yeah, all right.
It's not gonna work.
Can you just remove that, and we'll discuss it, if possible? Thanks. Okay, welcome to Senate Education. It is Wednesday, March 9th. We're going to start with Ledge Council on a couple of items. S211, we're going to return to that, which is Vermont teaching careers, and just have a conversation. We'll then do S162, where we have some new language. This is the collective bargaining rights of teachers bill. Holly Morehouse will be here to talk about after-school programs. We'll also ask her to weigh in on S197. We're then going to hear from Heather Boucher, Department of Agency of Education on 197. And we have a gubernatorial appointee confirmation. We have a high school student, Gabrielle Lucci, who wants to be on the State Board of Education. So she will be joining us as well. So with that, is Mr. Desmarais there? Jim, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you. So I put on the agenda for just some discussion here, S211. This is a bill where we had talked about, how do we get teachers into the state? How do we attract more teachers? How do we, and I guess you could expand it by saying, how do we deal with this teacher shortage crisis? And what I thought we would do is just to remind everybody that the Agency of Education, part of the ESSER funding is requiring them to look at this issue. So what I thought we might do is spend some time right now just making certain that our interests, some of our ideas are captured, and we might email them, a letter. I don't think we need to do a bill per se, but what are the things that we want to capture when we're thinking about attracting teachers, dealing with the teacher shortage, that kind of thing. So I thought we might just spend some time coming up with a list. We might look to you, Jim, to help us draft a letter. If not, I can do it as well. Okay? So with that, the Agency of Education has ESSER funds. They need to look at this issue. So we just spend maybe 20 minutes around, what kinds of things we want to make certain they are looking at. And I'm happy to kick it off by saying, one of the things we've heard through these conversations around S162 is, how do we specifically be thinking about rural schools, rural education? Is there something that we need to be doing as a state to kind of keep our eye on rural schools? And to that, I would just say, and these are just ideas, should Vermont set a minimum salary for teachers? I mean, I saw where New Mexico is moving in that direction. Is there something like that that we might think about doing, so that you cannot get, in a way, some of these, huge discrepancies in a way? And I don't know how that would impact things economically if we said, hey, Franklin County, you cannot, go below. I think what New Mexico might be doing in rural parts of the state is 60,000. Well, what does that do to the rest of the state? So those are just two things that I'm thinking about that I would love for them to sort of consider and think about.
And being the task force?
Being the task force. But again, it would be mostly the Agency of Education, and we could direct them to partner with people, something like that. Yeah.
Not against the minimum salary at all.
Yeah.
I just wonder if we're really opening the door to just a statewide teachers contract, which I think has been taken up before, and maybe just broadening the discussion to revisiting that to see if it's more palliative with what the information we have today.
Yep. Statewide teachers contract should definitely be on the table. Yeah.
Debt forgiveness
Debt forgiveness.
and scholarships, and I know we're working on that in DSAC too.
But still, you're right. I mean,
But
how
we
do
need
we?
to increase that, I think.
So if we're going to keep teachers who are currently there
Yeah.
and have been suffering through the pandemic like gangbusters,
Yeah.
I mean, we could, one of the things we actually talked about in committee this morning
Yeah.
was having workshops for teachers, sort of the wellness workshops that have been so lacking recently. So yes, which helps teachers with their own needing support. Because they're giving support to kids, they need support back. And Heather Boucher actually brought this up in committee, and I thought it was a great idea.
That's great. So wellness workshops,
We gotta
teachers
put
might
that
go
in one
to.
of
programs.
It's really a good idea. Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
But we were talking about having had, I mean, when I was in the classroom.
Yeah.
We had a wellness program, Path to Wellness, and it was, I think, through NEA, and we could talk about that and see what kind of program that was. It was free.
Okay.
It was open to all of the members. You could call and get somebody on the other end of the line. But that and the workshops, or even, groups that came together to talk about situations, and this could be something that could be implemented, I think, really quickly.
Mhm.
Not the typical faculty meeting, but just groups coming together to share their experiences and share their concerns.
I'm also putting on this, as they do this, they need to hear directly from teachers.
Oh,
I appreciate
absolutely.
the work of the NEA and everybody, but really going and are there ways to have confidential, thoughtful conversations with teachers so they
And-
feel
and-
like they can say what they need to say?
And I wouldn't forget staff as well.
Can you hand me that list that I gave you for next week? And staff as
Because
well.
they're an integral part.
Yeah,
On the debt forgiveness, have we talked about that as part of a commitment to teach, or just, is that for existing teacher, or is that part of like trying to encourage new teachers? Which is not my idea, I heard it from a constituent about, like, if you go to a state college and get your teaching degree, you go tuition free if you stay in Vermont and teach for X amount of time.
Yeah,
In a rural area.
Yeah. in
Yeah,
like an
yeah,
area.
yeah.
3 years.
I like the commitment. I mean, that's what we used to do. You had 10% a year or 5% a year that was deducted for every year you taught
Off your debt.
off your debt, up to like, in my case, I think it was up to 50%. In my brother's case, who taught special ed, was in special ed, it was up to 100%.
80%.
10% a year.
Wow.
And that was through the state college?
That was through the state. I mean,
Incredible.
this was a
Still,
long
that's
time
incredible.
ago,
Yeah,
but, he had his debt forgiven.
okay, yeah.
I love the pipeline piece. I don't know if this would at all entwine with the health and welfare committee, but nursing too. I feel like we need more nurses, so any type of
Exactly.
incentive.
Mhm.
And then the other piece to somewhat benefit the existing teachers that are stressed and have put in overtime during this pandemic, the tax benefit, the federal one. I think that's something that would benefit all practicing teachers if they could have an additional reimbursement. That $250 tax credit, that I'm sure Senator Hooker is familiar with, has been the same amount for ages, but if Vermont had another one, even for a couple of years, just to reward the teachers that have spent more money doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
And your comment about nurses is poignant to this. I was talking to a former school nurse who said, they really need nurses in schools.
Mhm.
So if there could be some kind of an incentive for nurses to be.
And the school nurses are supplied through or go through the Department of Health.
Yeah,
And so I'm wondering if there's something we can do. Because there aren't enough school nurses,
Mhm.
period. And then they have to share them around.
Mhm.
So how do we put pressure on the Department of Health? Or how do we have these two groups working together,
partner with them.
continue to work together? They have in the pandemic, it's
Mhm.
been good. So it's a continuation. We can think about that in our bill.
Do nurses, are there licensure, is it reciprocal, with surrounding states? Because that's one thing I'm interested in with teachers. This was raised at the meeting with Rutland folks. Can people from New York just come over and teach, or is the licensure thing incredibly different? I'm wondering with nurses, if there's anything that, with the compact.
Yeah, no, if you have a compact license, then you can participate in compact states, so you could have a compact
Mhm.
to do that.
For teachers, is that what you're?
Yeah. for
Yeah, because we
teachers.
have it for nurses. Right?
Yeah.
We passed the compact for nurses.
And during the pandemic, there was a lot of crossover going on with, a reduction of requirements.
Right.
The thing to think about is maybe early, there are teachers, people who are going in to get their education degree,
Mhm.
and they are not yet licensed, what can we do for those people? How can we make it simpler to transition in from the business world or
Yes.
Oh, right.
other
Yeah,
place?
yeah.
Right, yeah.
Being a historian to.
Yeah.
getting- Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Different idea.
It's difficult to do, and you need the licensures, you need licensed teachers, obviously. Because I think right now, we heard a lot of schools using, what they call temporary licenses or variances from the licensure requirement.
Mhm.
But there should be a way of, encouraging, you know,
Yeah.
maybe it's. I don't know if
We
it's
have a
tuition
surgeon
thing,
who
yeah.
went and taught science at Otter Valley
Mhm.
because he could no longer practice his trade.
Yeah,
I don't know what he had to do to get his certificate, his license, but I know that it happens. And if we could find out and see what the process is and
Yeah, I think the agency mentioned that there might be two sort of little fast track approaches. One's up in somewhere, I think, in the Burlington area, maybe connected to Champlain, which is a couple month course. And then I think there might be something out in Brattleboro as well. But, I mentioned a while ago, years ago, that this Hamilton report that came out of the economics department at Dartmouth, it really was all about, if you want to be in the classroom, you're going to be a good teacher generally. I mean, if you really want to be there, the licensure people, of course you want background checks, you want all that kind of thing. But, I do think it would be interesting to find ways to expedite some of this licensing kind of thing. And I don't think, you need a master's in education to be in, I'm not quite convinced of that. I really feel you want to be there, your content area, you're passionate. Yeah, sure.
I think we need to talk about teacher prep within the schools. And we've had this discussion before,
Giving them
what
the
kind
time.
of preparation is actually happening? Is there, I have to tell you the story. Again, several years ago, I was renewing my license and wanted to take a course on the philosophy or the psychology of
Yeah.
teens.
Okay.
And I have a degree in English, and I was told that that didn't fit.
Really?
So that, I shouldn't be taking that to up my licensure because it wasn't in my field. So there are things that are important that are not necessarily subject matter
Sure.
that can also be incorporated into those.
But I like what you're saying. It's, if all of a sudden somebody's been teaching American history for 4 or 5 years, and there's a course at UVM or Bennington or Middlebury or state colleges on, rethinking Puritanism, like how can we get them into that? Yes, in our lives.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about having some kind of shortened program for people who are transitioning from one field into teaching. And is there something that can be offered that is very inexpensive or in time expense? Thinking that there's some set of workshops, there's some peer tutoring that goes on, some internship,
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
I don't know what it would be, but there's got to be a way to take the person who's been out there in the real world and give them the characteristics and attributes and knowledge that they need to be a good teacher.
But it also sounds like you're thinking maybe we market towards certain
I
careers
am
too.
sort of thinking.
Oh,
Like if how do you market to, people in hospitals, people in other careers, people in business saying, hey, do you want to?
Yeah.
If you're thinking about changing, this is a great time to change, and here's some ways to do it.
So I know IBM, when IBM was.
Yeah, yeah.
They had that great program. My husband's cousin, he actually invented the microchip, and he went in and he went and started teaching high school. And he loved it, but it was what you said. He loved teaching, so
Yeah.
he loved kids, but
And aren't we doing some stuff now with kind of retraining? People can take courses at CCD
Mhm,
for tuition free
mhm, mhm.
yeah.
to kind of retrain or find something else. I mean, isn't that something that we can do with these people who are in other fields and want to come into
Mhm.
education? If we could partner with CCD for something like that, that would allow them.
Yeah, and I think it might get, and I'll talk to, maybe I'll have Sarah Buxton from Labor. I think it's gonna be so bad, I do think we're gonna be saying in 2 years, at least looking at some of the numbers, we gotta do something, we gotta fast. Like how can we really start to gear up for this? And I think it is marketing to people, making it easy. I went to fill out the paperwork for substitute teaching. And I think it could be made easier, drive over, pick up the pay, I've been though, I mean, I'm like 22nd century.
Well, I know that you
what I mean?
have to have fingerprinting done in a
Of
more
course.
timely, in a more timely fashion.
Well, yeah, all the background stuff, but, getting, I think there are different efficiencies that can be put in place to get people to do
Why don't we
this.
just say that? Why don't we just
Yeah,
list
efficiencies also,
efficiencies
yeah.
of licensure,
Mhm.
access to whatever, forms,
Quote, marketing.
marketing.
Yeah, that piece. Yeah,
So where are we with the retired teachers? It seemed like there was a path at the end of Treasurer Pierce's testimony that there wasn't. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it seemed like there wasn't there that we could do to.
it didn't sound, are you saying it didn't sound like there was a
It seemed
there?
like there was.
Okay, so the House has gotten,
Oh, maybe
the
that's.
House did send it, it should be, I think it's gonna come to us, probably Linda, yeah, it should, it should, I think it's.
So we
H1
dropped it
copy.
because it was coming over.
It was coming over.
Okay.
And otherwise, yeah, I wanted to get miscellaneous ed out. So they did pass it out. I think it came from Sarah Glenhoff's committee, GovOps, I think, something like that.
Okay.
So I suspect it may. Yeah. I'm just gonna add also just, retirement options.
Right, because we could add that in as something
Yeah.
we're looking at.
Right. Equity with other states, by that, it's just a reminder, again, I'll put S-162. When we got the information on what other states are doing around, these union kinds of decisions, we are definitely an outlier. I mean, a lot of our neighbors in New England are saying, take the time you need. There's really no deadlines, all those kinds of things. So,
One thing that crossed my mind is childcare and
I have housing
what
here too, but yeah.
what some teachers are running into is that, they live in one district, they teach in another district, but their kids have to be in childcare in the district that they live in.
Yeah,
And you're a mom, you want to be close to your kids if something comes up.
yeah.
So maybe we could try to make that a little easier
Mhm.
so that they can place their kids closer to. And we may have some information on that.
Well, I know I dealt with this with their older kids. You said childcare, so I don't know if you meant childcare or like
Preschool.
in the school system or even just like grade, because I did it with parents, teachers that had their kids in a grade school, but they're teaching.
Oh,
They
yeah,
said, can I bring my kid
yeah,
with
to that
me.
school.
to this school? And it's another one of those things, only if the two superintendents agree.
Right, right.
Yeah,
I was
know,
thinking
that's-
primarily of pre-K, the kids, you have to leave the baby
Right,
in one
Right, it's
county
probably
and you go
more
to the other to teach.
right. Senator Cheney?
We definitely had that same issue when our kids were young. My wife teaches in Colchester and she
Yeah.
couldn't bring our young kids to childcare or pre-K in Colchester without the superintendent's approval. And it was a big mess and we didn't end up doing it. But I'd also add to that there's capacity. I know I'm gonna get some emails, but there is some capacity in our schools, in some school districts, because we have a declining student population. I'd love to know what we're doing as a state to make sure that they were opening up those
Mhm.
spaces, because they're perfect for pre-Ks.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Three,
absolutely.
four,
Yeah,
five-year-olds.
yeah.
Make it
That
more
would be
accessible
great.
to everybody in the community.
Yeah,
I don't know how much, we've got to see how much that would cost, but it seems like a no-brainer.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
hope I
some
get some
schools
emails
have them.
after I say this. The superintendents seem to have like some little features, like I'm really
Well,
can't
they
be
do
VT
make
at
some pretty
gmail.com.
astounding decisions
They do.
about people's
They
lives.
do, yeah, they do.
What else for teachers?
No, this is a good, is Frank still there? Yeah. I just want to make sure that we share our thoughts and ideas with the agencies, so they don't come back in a year and say, hey, these are some of the things we considered, and we sort of wish they'd consider it.
So, the whole concept of remote education.
Yeah,
And what role does that play in
Mhm,
adding instruction into the classroom? So it's, I don't know that it replaces, but just an evaluation of how to use Zoom.
yeah.
How-
Well, we have that in miscellaneous.
Yeah.
items. Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
got the remote piece.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how to use that for instructional purposes
Yeah,
or to move one really good teacher to many districts,
right. I know in Craftsbury, when my cousins were there, I think they may have had somebody Zoom in that taught Chinese. Or, they kind
Yeah,
of figured
yeah.
that kind of thing out.
Yeah.
Again, how do we not abandon
Right.
rural communities, but also we don't want them to have to Zoom all day either. And I know
No.
that's not what you're saying.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
still, there's could be some connections that are made. If you want to have, maybe there's a teacher that's in Brattleboro who we know has, and we heard from one last year who just really encourages students and does really well.
That's right, yeah.
And then how do you connect that person with a group of teachers or with students? I'm just thinking, how do you use that? How do you?
Yeah, technology in general, yes, Senator Chin.
I float in circles with other teachers, but I will say one concern, but one complaint I will anonymize, that I heard was that their school district was allowing them and requiring them to do Zoom parent-teacher conferences, which if you're a teacher, that's a big thing. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work and prep. But they required the teachers to go to the school and Zoom from the school with the teachers. And the teachers are like, I just want to be home because I can get more things. So I think this
Yeah.
is a broader question about workplace environment and how to incorporate Zoom into modern
Yeah,
education.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, this is,
Rather be at home.
this certainly
Yeah.
isn't new. The technology has evolved, but interactive TV has been around for a long time. I used to moderate a class in Proctor that was being
Yeah.
taught by somebody from Burlington. And I just had to sit there with the two students who were taking the AP course or something. But that is one thing. And then cooperating teachers, and that sounds like what you're talking
Yeah.
about. My brother used to be one for special education. He would meet with groups of teachers. So if you could do that over Zoom, so teachers don't have to leave their home, they can do the laundry
Yeah.
between on the
right,
break.
right,
Yeah,
right,
there
right.
you go.
It's
Yeah,
efficiency, Thomas.
yeah,
And it saves driving in a time of
It-
high gas prices.
It does,
Yeah.
and it's ecologically sound.
As a Zoom legislator for the last year and a half, I've been on top of all the dishes and the
totally,
laundry.
absolutely. I'm just gonna write this down. People, once we see a draft, people might want to remove it, but a lot of this stuff, I know we're talking about shared governance in higher ed, which I don't know how I feel about it, but some of these, are there ways around shared governance, in schools that could work? And I don't know the answer to that. I just don't know the answer to that.
You mean on the school boards?
Well, so why would it teach, like the whole, I think it's the Montessori schools that sometimes rotate a faculty member as the principal. I'm not saying that's where,
Right.
but you kind of get, how other teachers feel, because you really are one of those teachers at the moment. Bringing teachers in for parent-teacher conference in the school and some of the kids aren't going to be there. Again, it's, maybe there's some decision around it, but if you're a teacher, maybe, I don't know if a teacher would make that decision.
Right.
So I'm not really sure what I mean by shared governance, but are there different ways to communicate
Well,
so that, I don't know.
sort of, it's not, I don't know if you'd call it shared governance, but I know of schools that have co-principals. And sometimes it isn't a
That's
bad
interesting,
idea to
yeah.
have somebody else to help you
Right,
to
yeah,
steer the ship.
yeah,
I know a lot of school boards that have a student,
Yeah.
they can't vote, but they attend all the meetings.
Yep.
It doesn't seem far-fetched to me to have a teacher that
Yeah.
can't vote on the school board, that's
Right.
on every member, that's plugged in, that's
Certainly.
compensated and part of their workload to just be really in tune with what the school board directions is.
Good idea.
yeah, that is a
Yeah.
good idea.
Good idea.
really interesting. Okay, so I'll type these up with Jim. We'll just get a draft going. I think we'll likely do this by letter unless people object to it. Think about it. But again, the agency has to do this work.
What do you mean by that?
A letter that we would all sign to the Secretary of Education,
Separate than 211?
separate than 211. It's
Recommendation.
just something yeah,
The other thing we have to keep in mind
but I'm not, I'm just,
is the plea from the agency not to pile on too much.
yeah, that's what I mean. So they're doing this work. They have to do it because of ESSER. I just don't want them to come back and say, hey, we didn't have any direction,
Right.
or
No,
we
this
just
is-
decided to look at these things. Not that they would, but
But you'd still do 211, they would still, the task force in 211 would still do it, but you're saying the letter is just for us, or you wouldn't do 211?
I don't think I would do 211 since they're really doing the work in 211 on their own. And I would just direct them a little bit with the letter.
Okay,
So maybe tomorrow we'll look at a draft letter and people could say, hey, yeah, it doesn't feel right, or it does feel right. Because when we talked about 211 with the agency and others, it just, there are ESSER funds, the agency's working on it. Jeff Bannon said that, different groups are, speaking of the devil.
yeah.
Well, we're just talking about some comments that you had said in committee a while ago about teacher shortage, basically. And that there's the Agency of Education, there are some informal groups, people are talking about these things. And we just want to make sure that we get some answers in a year. So we're debating whether or not we're going to use a letter format saying, hey, we've got a bunch of questions for a bill. So that's all.
A letter to,
And of course, we have the same question, the Agency of Education. Yeah.
And when, bottom line,
Yeah.
it's the money. And
I mean,
And
yeah,
I
that's
don't
the other
know.
thing.
The
Sometimes I think
minimum
teachers, people think teachers just should be like 19th century ministers, honestly,
I
and not me, they need to make
Same way
real
with
money.
primary care doctors.
Yeah,
it's more, I know that it's more than a job, it's a vocation.
it is, and I get absolutely, but you gotta step up and give
but you
people
have
what
to
they
give
really
people-
deserve. I mean,
Yeah, there's kind of a historical piece of that with it being a more feminine
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, and back in the 1900s,
Mhm.
up until 1930 and past that, if you got married, you couldn't teach. It's like, there's some pretty awful
I
things.
didn't know that.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah,
yeah.
there's a big history to that one. Yeah,
So it was single women who
Really?
were
yeah.
carrying the burden.
And they were paid very little because they
Very,
were
yeah.
single. They
Yeah.
didn't need money.
Yeah, or having small apartments in cities, I
Yeah.
think,
The one-room schoolhouse,
yeah.
chopping wood.
And it's definitely a full-time,
Oh,
24/7
it's
job.
amazing,
Yeah.
it's amazing, yeah. So on that note, so that's good, so I think we're in good shape. Jim and I will work on this and bring something to the committee, some kind of outline, what direction we might move in, and on this and go from there. Feel okay?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. That's 162. This is Senator Perslick's bill, an act relating to collective bargaining rights of teachers. And Senator Perslick's been in contact with the parties involved, and I'll turn it over to Senator Perslick. If that's good with you.
And I think we have two versions of S 162. They both say as introduced. I'm not sure. I guess maybe
One's
one
bigger-
as introduced. One
One's a
has
bigger
that shape.
font.
Yeah, one's a bigger font.
One is the printout of the record.
And one is that just as introduced.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So the one with the color has changes.
Is that the little font?
Yes.
Yeah, the little font. So it has, unfortunately, the comment column, which makes the font smaller.
Do I go for it?
Oh,
is
yeah.
that this one?
It's probably set on your desk.
I got it right there. Thank you.
Okay. So I did talk to the Principal Association and NEA, and as they reported in the sections 2 and 3, dealing with teachers being able to testify And can't remember what the other one was actually. Anyway, those sections, they had agreed, made some changes on the.
Fire and fire.
Fire and fire.
Fire and fire is what they call it, right?
Yeah, but
No, fire and
Firing and
testify.
testifying.
Fire was not agreed to. but
Yeah.
Fire and testify.
And the testifying, there was language in statute about state employees testifying. And they basically used that language and had to apply not only to teachers, but all school employees, so even principals or staff that might come and testify. So that language is in here.
Jim, would you mind taking us through the language, sections 2 and 3?
Yeah, this is the language that came over from the bees, right?
Yeah, I sent it to you, but it's from the V's, yeah.
Right. It's not the one I sent back to you, is it?
I'm not sure. I didn't see my email.
Oh,
For me.
okay. I incorporated into an amendment for the committee their language with some questions in it for you. So I wasn't sure which one you were looking at. So the language that they raised, I'm not sure if I should take you through their language. They're here to testify. Do you want them to take you through their language?
1 second here, I'm just wondering, yeah, why don't we have, does that work for you, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have Mr. Fannin come up and take us through this, if that works for you as well. Jennifer?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm usually on top of things, but I don't know what language we're referring to.
Yeah,
This one.
I don't have the one with yellow on it.
no, it's not this one.
Yeah,
It's-
you have
What's
your.
that blue?
I
Yeah,
don't
but-
have
I got that.
anything for Jeff, but I have.
The language you all agreed to in the second and third.
Drafted language.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, so you have the drafted language from Mr. Fannin.
Yes, everyone.
Everybody
Which I
has
think
it.
is-
Okay, which is
The one
this.
with the comments on
Okay.
it.
Yeah, yeah. this one.
Okay, great.
This look.
So if you would tell us, Mr. Fannin, not to put you on the spot, but where everybody's at and what you're thinking.
Sure. Good afternoon. Jeff Fannin, for the record, Executive Director of Vermont EA. Thank you for your efforts on S-162. As I orally suggested yesterday, there was some language that we had proposed that the principals, superintendents, and school board association were not pleased with, but nevertheless, let me just walk back through that and we'll get to this
Sure,
in a
please.
second. Just set the table
You
again.
bet.
We took your request yesterday to look at what other states are doing and really give us a fresh new look. We thought we had a good sense. We have a better sense now. Certainly Vermont is an outlier on this issue, all the way from the Mason-Dixon line north. And so we didn't want to exacerbate that problem. So, which is partly why last week when we were working with them and trying to, the associations, trying to come to some agreement, we didn't, the language that I read to you yesterday, we thought actually made the difference and got us where we wanted. Hearing you yesterday, apparently that concept wasn't familiar. Really, all it is saying superintendents shouldn't interfere with people's right to get a new job, and consistent with the other states, all in our neighborhood, really. And we didn't want to compound the mistake. So the language I shared that you're looking at now was a proposal we were talking about last week. And frankly, it was not something we were thrilled with, but
I don't think this has the language about the dates in it. If that's what you're referring to.
I think what you're looking at is the blue one that's got May 31 in it.
We're looking at a version, I think, that doesn't have that section.
Yeah.
Got it. So you're looking at the 2 and 3.
Exactly.
So that was 2 and 3 are exactly what we all agreed to last week. It addresses what's known as the Clayton decision at the Vermont Supreme Court and how we process discharge cases. and also allows all school employees to come before you, the State Board of Education, and testify without fear of retribution or discipline. So those are 2 and 3 that we agreed to with them and they with us, I think, and you can ask Jay, I'm sure he would agree. I think he would agree that that's all what we agreed to.
Senator Jennings.
It is unclear to me.
Sure.
If you mean this was agreed to, because this is in section 1 in this copy.
We're calling them section 1 and 2. I apologize. You're right. That is what I would call part 2 in B.
Oh, okay.
That's agreed to.
Correct. And that has to do with how you fix, if you will.
And
the
I'll
Clayton
have to
decision.
get us a clean copy by
Yeah.
the end of today, just so everybody.
And that starts with the provisions of section C through E.
Yeah.
Shall not apply to a teacher who is employed under the terms of collective bargaining agreement, et cetera.
Senator Persily.
Just this version starts with section 1, which used to be the dates, the June 15th, but that, because there is an agreement on that, we thought maybe we could just move the dates around. When I talked to folks yesterday, there still is not agreement on that. So this copy just takes that out. Just that we're not gonna
Okay.
deal with it.
Thank you.
So that's why section 1 is what we call
Got it.
part 2.
Do you have that?
No.
There you go.
Phew.
Yeah. No, I have a copy.
Thanks.
So it's a copy of the bill with that issue just taken out.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask the committee, is this posted, this version?
Daphne, is this version posted?
No, I just.
Oh, that's right. Would you mind posting it now?
Yes.
Thanks. Or send a copy to Mr. Demeray.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jim.
So to be clear,
Yeah.
all this is you're right, it's section 1 in the bill, but it's 1752B.
Yep.
Forward are the changes, if you will, and it only addresses the fix to the Clayton decision, as well as allowing employees to testify from the original as introduced bill. So those are 2 agreements. It does not address 1752A. You're right, Senator Perchlik. That's not in that version. So I think we're all grounded in that sense.
I think so. So what we're looking at in front of us is the agreement,
Right.
The agreed upon
the
language.
agreed upon language.
And I think you should check with Jay. Just to
We
make
will,
sure, but,
absolutely.
I believe the languages as we all agreed to last week.
In this version that we have on our desk, the language in blue is the language that the 2 sides agreed on how to deal with those 2 issues.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
And as I said before, it takes the state language that work for state employees testifying and uses it to apply to all teachers. And then it just describes on, if a teacher is fired on how the appeal process is dealt with.
Right. The Vermont Supreme Court decision has taken what we had been using for a bunch of years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and said you have to go through a 2-step process that was very cumbersome for school boards and for teachers to navigate. Didn't make a lot of sense, frankly. It wasn't very efficient. It's very time sensitive to both sides. And instead, both parties have been using for years what was their grievance process under their collective bargaining agreement. And this basically says, use your grievance process under your collective bargaining agreement.
Senator, do you have a question?
No.
Questions?
So make no mistake, though, we thought that the language around asking superintendents not to interfere was, that would be our preferred language. I understand they don't agree with it. That would be our preferred language in that first part of 1752A.
What, did you ask the question about that when a letter of intent has been presented?
I would say there's great dispute. A letter of intent is not a contract.
I understand that, but
Right.
what I'm saying is, what I'm hearing is that there's a letter of intent, people sign it and they return it, and then the contract may be issued later. So between that time, and we'll forget what the date is, in that time, that's a time when we've heard that there has been interference from one superintendent to another to keep a teacher from interviewing or taking a job.
I would say that is a subset of the larger problem.
Yeah.
It's not the typical problem. What I typically have heard over the many years is teacher signs her contract, then sees something
Right.
else available and wants to pursue that and is blocked from doing so. The letter of intent comes about somewhat rarely, I would say, when the parties haven't agreed to a new collective bargaining agreement. And so you don't know what the terms of next year's teaching, what that contract
Yeah.
would be. So you can't actually contract with somebody. You have an intention to contract. And yes, I agree to intend to contract with you, assuming that, both sides are assuming that
Both
the
sides.
collective bargaining agreement makes sense. And that's essentially, it's not a contract, it's a letter of intent to contract.
Senator
So,
Chittenden had his hand up.
sorry, go ahead.
Please continue.
I was just gonna follow on that and ask about the letter of intent. Does it carry the same weight as the contract in that you're not allowed to break? Oh, yes.
I think it depends on who you ask. And honestly, the way 1752A is written today, a teacher can break the contract. There may be a consequence to that, but that's certainly permissible.
That consequence is where my question was.
Yeah.
So with the language I've said twice that you like, I still can't reconcile how that addresses 1752A, where it says a teacher under contract to teach in a public school fails without just cause to complete the term, the teacher shall be disqualified to teach in any public school for the remainder of the school year. I don't see how your language addresses that serious concern that somebody that's on a contract but finds another job during this window, takes another job, can't be then still disqualified to teach in that next academic year. But I'd love to see the language because you've only mentioned it.
Sure.
Several times.
I'm happy to share that sentence so you have it, but it's just a one additional sentence that simply says, the next sentence is, no superintendent shall interfere with the teacher's right to interview for, be offered, or accept a new teaching position.
But you're still talking about section 1.
Section A.
Section A,
Yeah,
section
yes.
A, which is not, okay.
Correct. So I understand what you're saying. It's still just cause. A teacher can sever her contract under current law and for years and years if she has just cause. Now, just cause is an undefined term. It's a term part in the labor world, but it's not specific. It's determined by a neutral fact finder. The Superintendent's Association and Principal Association would say, if that's not, they have reported people to the Agency of Education for breaking the contract mid-year, if you will, believing that they should not be permitted to go to a new job in the state. And I'm unaware of the AOE, or before that, the DOE, saying we agree you can't do that.
Yes.
Is applying to another job for more money and a better commute just cause?
I certainly would think so.
Okay, so then I guess
But
Somebody else may think.
somebody may think otherwise.
Yes.
that's where my concern is.
Yeah,
Right.
that mine,
And
yes, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Are consequences standard for breaking contract?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it's up to the district?
Well, I think, I don't know that a district can, your former employer can, I don't know how, but I couldn't, and this is the issue, right? Their superintendents are trying to block people from even interviewing for new jobs. But let's assume for a minute, I think your hypothetical is, I'm now working in District 2, my second employer. Can the first employer, my former employer, do something to me? I don't know.
I'm actually just wondering what the consequences are for breaking the contract and if they're standardized throughout the state or if they're district
For
by
not
district.
just cause. If it's not just
If
cause.
it's not, if,
Yeah, I
If it's
thought
not
it
just,
was like-
assume
there is
that-
no standard,
So you could
no
have to
sentencing
pay-
guidelines, if
yeah,
you will.
you could have to pay so much in one district and not pay something.
There's no overarching single consequences.
And I thought there was for some reason. I thought Mr. Nichols, is there something? I thought there was, you couldn't teach, you lost your license for a year or something.
Well, assuming that's it.
That's what I mean. That's what
why-
she's asking.
That's why.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
yeah, that's.
That's correct. That's correct. If you break a contract, you lose your right to teach in the state of Vermont, and any other licensed job in the state of Vermont, unless you say it's just cause, and if your superintendent disagrees with you and your board disagrees with you, you have the right to go to the Agency of Education, who will make the final determination.
Okay, so,
No, just for, is it permanent?
No,
No.
just for the remainder of that
For 1
school
year.
year.
so that's the consequence.
In theory, yes.
Senator Chicken.
So if we're not certain what just cause is and when it's going to be defined, I just put myself in my lovely wife's position or a teacher's position where they don't know what just cause is, and they're still going to be as intimidated from possibly pursuing gainful employment somewhere else. So that's why I like the date window. That's crystal clear, and they know that during that time window, if something else comes up in another district, they could explore elsewhere. So your language, I still just don't see how that solves that. Could be disqualified from teaching for a year, but maybe I'm missing something.
Right. I think our concern that we brought forward was the superintendent's interfering with people trying to even do that.
Can I weigh in on that part a little bit? If that's okay, Senator Campion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Please.
so the only way the superintendent interferes is if the person is already under contract. So if you had a situation where you had a window, whatever that window might be, that people could apply for other jobs in, then it would be a moot issue, which is why we tried to work with your original date of June 15th, which we think is completely untenable, but try to come up with some kind of compromise. And we talked about May 1st, and even went as far as May 15th as a potential compromise. At least then you're opening the hiring window from February, because there's tons of jobs advertised right now, all the way through to whatever that end date is. And we thought that would be the fairest compromise. And it's not something our members want. Our members would like it to stay the way that it is, but that would be a change we would support. Changing it to a situation where teachers could leave anytime they want and make the argument for just cause without superintendents being able to say, I'm sorry, we don't hire somebody under contract. That's not tenable to us, and it's not supportive of stable environments for students. So that's why we would support some type of window, as long as it gave us a few weeks to actually have people teach kids in our schools, so we could see if they were a teacher we really wanted working with kids.
But Mr. Nichols, just to bring us back to the agreement that's before us, are you and your folks good with us advancing what we kept referring? I mean, we'll get you a clean copy, but what we kept referring to is sections 2 and 3, which is allowing people to testify and the firing piece.
Absolutely. I think we did real good work on that. A lot of credit to Jeff Fannin and Chris Leopold, who both are lawyers that are involved with this stuff a lot. Jeff used to be involved with this a lot. And we think that those laws actually make it, that change in section 2 especially, just makes it simpler for everybody. And then the change in section 3 gives all school employees the opportunity to come before you. And if I'm a superintendent and I'm worried about what my school board might do to me in terms of discipline, if I testify on something that they don't agree with, this gives them protection as well, which we appreciate.
Senator Hooker.
So yes, please, could you, Jay, reiterate what you said about what you would be willing to accept?
Well, we had hoped for, I can't remember what I don't know if there's such thing as last best offer when we were having informal negotiations. I know we offered contract ending on the ending date being May 1st with an automatic 2-week extension. And I had offered the idea of May 15th with the possibility of a 2-week extension to May 30th. So if I'm applying for a teaching job and I want to apply, my employer gives me a contract, I don't have to return that to May 15th. And if I tell them I'm an active consideration or I'm being interviewed or whatever kind of language we want, I would get an extension right to May 30th by just telling them that. And that might just be an email to the superintendent, which is what I had in my contract as a superintendent for teachers. They get their month basically, and then they could get an extra 2 weeks to just asking for the 2 weeks by saying, hey, Jay, I'm interviewing or I'm a finalist at such and such a school. I need to exercise the 2 weeks extension. Something like that. So at least we have an idea that we can start advertising for anticipated openings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? It sounds like, again, Mr. Fannin, your constituency right now, you're comfortable with the two and these guys are comfortable with this. We'll see a clean copy.
Yes.
And that's where we'll go. Senator Hooker.
Nope, just
Okay.
actually, Jeff, do you want to respond to?
No, I think,
That's all.
yeah, I mean,
We didn't come to agreement on that, Jay. There's no, we don't quarrel with the fact that we didn't come to an agreement. So I think we disagree on that point, which is what I'm suggesting to you is we are in agreement on 2 and or B and C, if you were,
Yeah.
D, whatever the other section is.
Anything else?
I agree with that.
Are we still talking about the piece that we're in disagreement on?
We're talking
Or is
about.
that a separate discussion?
Some tomorrow's. No, but yeah, if anybody does have any questions, seriously, anything?
I'll just say, I like the dates and the original structure. I think it threads the needle, and I as I showed this to teachers I know, the window seems to make a lot of sense, because they're planning their next year too, and they're not gonna want to jump around throughout the year. So the language you keep mentioning, I just don't see how that's better. That's what I'll stop there.
Right, I mean, we supported the bill as introduced.
Okay.
We've gotten away from that a little bit, but if you were to go back to the June 15th, it's not exactly what we want. I know they're not happy with it, but we think that's threads the needle, if you will.
Senator
Yeah.
Persick, your bill, your work?
Yeah, I mean, what, it seemed like there was a time where there was gonna be agreement on the date, so I said, well, let's move the date, and then there was an agreement, so we could decide to, as a committee, to pick a date and say that's better than it is now, because you know, there is no window, but there's problems with the window, but I'm willing to pick a date if you want to, but I'm also willing to say that the section 2 and 3 are changes that are good, and we can pass that too. And
Senator Hooker?
Thank you. Jay, barring snow days, what's the traditional day of getting out of school, or what's the window of when school's closed?
Man, it's kind of all over the place. Typically, I would say June 15th is probably, it's close to an aggregated date, across the state. On average, you'd probably get in most years. Sometimes it's June 7th or 8th, and some schools, other schools might be June 20th, depending on when they start and stuff. I did want to mention, that's why I threw my hand up, since you called on me, I'm going to take the opportunity. The date of June 15th is not threading the needle. The date of June 15th is completely untenable. If we were to go with just approving sections 2 and 3 or B and C, however we're looking at those, and leave everything else as current status quo, my association would be thrilled by that, especially in a time where it's hard to find workers. And I'm pretty sure school boards and superintendents would feel the same way.
So committee, what if we were to look at tomorrow's Thursday, look at a clean draft with what the agreement is, and if anybody wants to put an amendment on the table tomorrow with dates, feel free to put an amendment on the table with dates and we can consider it. Does that feel okay to everybody? Okay. Mr. Demeray, does that work for you?
Can't hear you, deaf, Jim.
Terrific.
Sorry, yes, it does.
Okay, so Daphne will have you in tomorrow with a clean draft. And then if anybody wants to put dates on the table, please feel free to work with Mr. Demeray on an amendment, and we still have it Friday.
Thank you. And I will get you, Senator, that sentence so you have it at least.
Great. Do you have any other bills that you want to surprise us with at this point?
Thank you all.
No, I actually, I think I appreciate Senator Persick, everybody's conversation around this. I'm glad we're moving forward with something here. Yeah, it's important.
So the small bill that everybody agree with about moving education funding to the income tax.
I don't even know if we accept them.
Do we have 15 minutes?
Mr. Nichols, thanks for your work. If we do anything else on this that would change it, we'll certainly have you back in. Thanks again.
I appreciate that.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Okay. Thanks. We'll see a clean draft tomorrow. Okay, so we have Holly Morehouse next. Why don't we just take 10 minutes? People can, this will be our break, back at 20 minutes to 3, and we'll pick up with Holly